Hello and welcome to another video here at AV Forums. This time we're taking you through our recommended picture settings for the Sony XE94 XE9405 Ultra HD 4K TV. Now, as always, I'm going to preface this video by saying that these settings are based on the sample that we reviewed. I can't guarantee they'll make a picture better, they might make it worse, but they are mostly fairly general settings that should be applicable from one unit to the next. So let's go into the action menu, go down to picture. Now I'm going to show you night, day, game and HDR settings. So we'll start with a nighttime setting for standard dynamic range content, and I'm using the picture mode Cinema Pro, which is actually the most accurate mode, the one with no backdoor processing, so it's the one I use the most. Advanced settings. Okay, brightness. Now this is actually the brightness, the backlight basically control on this TV. On most TVs, brightness means black level. On Sony TVs, brightness actually means brightness. And this is a very bright TV, so for a nighttime setting, a setting of 8 gives you 100-120 nits of brightness, which is more than sufficient for nighttime viewing of standard dynamic range content. So I'm using a setting of 8. Contrast, 88. At this point, there's no clipping of peak whites. Gamma of -2, which gives you a gamma of 2.4, which again is what we use for a nighttime setting. Black level you can leave as its default setting of 50. Black adjust off. Advanced contrast enhancer off. We're using a local dimming setting of medium. Feel free to experiment. I find with high you get too much haloing. Medium works extremely well, so that's what I'm using. And extended dynamic range off. Down under color, you can leave the color as default setting of 50 and hue as default setting of 0. So for the color temperature, we're using Expert 1, which gives us access to the white balance controls under advanced color temperature. And here you can see, now there was a little bit too much blue in the grayscale on this TV, so you can see we've brought blue gain down by -7. We've also had to bring green down by -3 because you can't go up with these controls, only down at the gain settings, and red's left at its default setting of max, and then red and green and blue bias are all at 0. And that gave us a very accurate grayscale. And then finally, live color off. Under clarity, sharpness control at 50, which is the default setting. Reality creation, feel free to experiment with this. You can set it to auto or manual. We do find sometimes it can make pictures look quite detailed, but also it can also enhance and make grain more obvious, so it's worth experimenting with. We've left it off for these settings. And then also random noise reduction off, digital noise reduction off. Smooth gradation, again, some room for experimentation here. We sometimes just leave it on low setting. Feel free to do that. Can make things like skies and areas of large color look more smooth with less gradation. It can be quite effective, so worth experimenting with as well. Motion, for film-based content, we're using True Cinema. There are other settings you can experiment with for sports video-based content, and this TV does also include black frame insertion, although you might find that that causes flicker and it does make the image darker, but obviously there's plenty of brightness here to bring that brightness back up again. But for film-based content, we always use a setting of True Cinema. And for film mode, set that to low. Okay, so that's our nighttime setting. We'll go back to the top and we'll select Cinema Home, which is going to be our daytime setting. Obviously, basically, the point is it's brighter. So when you're watching TV in a room with more ambient light, you have a brighter image. Now, what have we got here? We've used a brightness setting of 25 now. Again, this is a really bright TV. This was more than bright enough at 25 for a room with plenty of bright light in it. So it won't be applicable to every room. Obviously, it will have to vary depending on your environment. But for our room, 25 was more than bright enough for a daytime setting. Contrast again at 88. Gamma is now at 0, which is a gamma of 2.2 for our daytime setting. Black level left at 50. Black adjust off. Advanced contrast enhancer off. Auto local dimming medium. Then dynamic range off. Under color, we brought color down slightly to 47 just to bring some slight oversaturation in red down. Hue we left at 0. And under the Expert 1, we've got red still at max, green at -2, blue gain at -6, and red and green and blue bias at 0. And again, live color off. Clarity, sharpness at 50. Reality creation, as I say, you can experiment, auto, manual, or off, depending on your preference. And again, random noise reduction off, digital noise reduction off, and low, smooth gradation is set to low this time. But feel free to experiment. And then for motion, again, True Cinema for film-based content. Feel free to experiment for video-based content like sports, for example, and film mode is on low. So that's our daytime setting. Let's have a look at game. There we go, game. So I'm using the same brightness settings I was for daytime mode, 25, contrast 88, gamma 0, black level 50, black adjust off, advanced contrast enhancer off, local dimming at medium, and extended dynamic range off. Under color, we've got 50 for the setting and hue at 0, and then the expert controls are actually the same as they were for the daytime setting. Got a nice accurate grayscale, red gain at max, green gain at -2, blue gain at -6, and red and green and blue bias at 0. Under clarity, sharpness at 50 at default setting. I've left reality creation off. Basically, I figure that when you're talking about keeping the input lag as low as possible, turn off any processing you possibly can. Most of it actually is turned off in the game mode, but I've also turned off reality creation, and I've turned off smooth gradation as well. And again, I wouldn't use any motion flow. That will add lag, so leave it off. Everything else is actually defaulted to off anyway. So that's the game mode, and you will need to use the game mode if you want to get the input lag as low as possible. Okay, now I'm going to change the input to an HDR source, and then we'll have a look at some HDR settings. Okay, so we're now sending an HDR signal. As you can see in the top right hand corner, it says HDR. So starting with the game mode in HDR, most of the settings are going to be the same whether you're in SDR or HDR. But basically, when the TV detects an HDR signal, it automatically defaults to certain HDR settings. Specifically, the brightness goes to max. Contrast stays the same, gamma leave at 0, black level stays the same, and down here, still using auto local dimming of medium, but now you can see extended dynamic range is set to high for HDR content. Under color, leave that as they are at 50 and 0, and it's the same Expert 1 settings, whether it's in SDR or HDR. It's a quirk of Sony TVs, but it's the same settings that are used for both HDR and SDR. So you can't really change that when you're using an HDR mode, you just have to use the same one for both. As with the SDR version, we've got sharpness at 50, reality creation off and smooth gradation off, and also motion flow is off as well. So that's a game at HDR setting. And if I go back to the top, I'm using Cinema Pro for my HDR setting for movies. And the reason I'm using that is because it's, again, the most accurate one with the least amount of backdoor processing, or none in fact. It's a pure mode where you're just seeing what's on the disc, which is what I want basically. And under advanced settings, as you can see, again, it's defaulted to maximum on the brightness setting. Contrast remains 88 as it was for SDR. Gamma's now at 0 rather than -2. Black level's the same. And again, auto local dimming is at medium, extended dynamic range is at high. Otherwise, all the settings are the same as they are for SDR. And again, the Expert 1 settings are applicable to both, so you can't actually change that. And then sharpness again is at 50. And I've got random noise reduction off, digital reduction off. Again, smooth gradation on or off, entirely up to you. And the same with motion, True Cinema for film-based content, but feel free to experiment with video-based content like sports. And then at the bottom you can see film mode is set to low still. And there you go. Those are our settings for a SDR day, SDR night, SDR game, HDR game, and HDR movie modes. If you've enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. And don't forget, you can find more reviews, news, articles, podcasts, and videos like this at avforums.com, Europe's largest home entertainment community. Thanks for watching.